there. Welcome to another presentation of the Globe Sound Healing Conference. Now we have Richard Feather Anderson. Hi, Richard.
Hi, David.
Hey, welcome. Richard Feather Anderson has a Bachelor of Science in Architecture, Feng Shui, is a Feng Shui master, is an internationally recognized pioneer in the revival of geomancy, Feng Shui, sacred geometry, and labyrinths. He continuously creates new environmental design applications for ancient earth wisdom and generously shares his knowledge with passion and humor. Cool.
That's famous for my giggle.
Right. Okay, so what have you been up to lately?
Oh, gosh. Just got back from a dowsing conference in Flagstaff that happens every 2 years. And put in a labyrinth there for everybody to use during the conference and taught them how to, it's the ancient or classic 7-circuit labyrinth. And that's the one that a colleague and I discovered way back in the 80s. There was a connection to the 7 chakras, with the 7 circuits of the path. And I have been playing with that and adding a whole bunch of things from sacred geometry to understand what a gift that is to humanity. So it was really neat to teach people that whole meditation. We did several walks. I was going to, usually I give a talk, everybody gives a talk twice so that, you have, the participants have options for, if there's 2 people they want to hear one time, they've got a second chance. And I decided this time, the second talk, I wanted to not do a talk and take them out to the labyrinth and have them experience that whole chakra meditation, and it was fabulous. And it was the first time that the opening and closing ceremonies at a dowsing conference was held at the labyrinth, which was also fabulous. And I did an advanced school right before that of how to create the labyrinth, and taught a whole bunch of people the geomantic way of doing labyrinths, which is rather unusual because most labyrinth people just put them down as art objects. And I have a whole process of communicating with the spirit of place, asking permission. Is it okay? Is it okay to put a labyrinth, or are you thrilled about having a labyrinth? Am I the right person? And then I go into this whole egoless state of, I'm just here in service to the labyrinth entity. I consider it a being that I'm helping, that I'm midwifing its incarnation in this particular spot. And that is not the way most people approach doing labyrinths. So when you said, in my bio about a pioneer, here I am again, combining geomancy and labyrinths and dowsing to develop a new approach. And it's just thrilled to be able to do that. And the people that came and got involved with that whole process were also thrilled, and it just delights me.
Nice. Okay, here's the big question. If you have all the money in the world, how could we help people on the planet?
Oh, gosh. Well, the first thing that pops into my mind would be to completely reform the educational system.
Yay.
Because, and that is, I've probably always been tended towards that because, part of my life mission is teaching. And there's 4 generations of teachers in my family, so we inherited this lineage of a lot of knowledge about how to teach in a lot of different situations, public schools and church schools and in nature camps and all kinds of things, and Boy Scouts. And but more and more, when I look at the mess the world is in and the chaos and, fill in the blank, however you're perceiving what's going on in the world right now, there's and all the, the anxiety that this is producing. I think it, I often ask what would be the 3 most important things to do, and education just keeps coming up. We haven't been teaching critical thinking. We're not teaching socialization. We're not teaching civics anymore, how the government, how the world works. We're not teaching economics on a practical level. All that stuff is missing. But the most important thing, and this goes to sort of what I didn't say in the talk, but is sort of a foundation of why I'm teaching sacred geometry. that in the ancient world, they considered it the foundation of education, that you were not, if you didn't, and we know this because at Plato's Academy, at the doorway was inscribed in the stone lintel above the portal, only those who know geometry may enter. And the reason for that is that they considered you weren't able to be educated if you didn't know sacred geometry. I mean, they just called it geometry. But I call it sacred geometry to distinguish it from high school geometry, which is a completely different thing. And their approach was, as you participants will hear it again in the slideshow in the talk. It's cosmology, philosophy, physics. It's the basis of the material world, but it's also the basis of society. So there's a whole piece of it that's just about relationships. And in fact, it's defined by Pythagoras as the study of relationships of objects in space. And so it's all about relationships. And if you don't understand how that works in ecology, in the natural world, how it works in society and social relationships, and how it applies to the golden rule as part of that, how you treat other people so that you have harmony and peace in your society, without having that understanding and where it comes from, the study of geometry, you basically were not in a position to be educated. So the fact that we don't have this in our school system, there's a huge hole there,
Not to mention the amount of trauma that people have gone through by going through math classes, right? I mean, seriously, actually, I mean, I would bet, I remember my math class. I was really good at math, right? But I remember my math, I would bet you half of the people in math class are going, what the hell's going on here? Right? I mean, even if you're smart, you're still going, what the hell's going on here? Because there's no applicability.
Yes. Why am I studying this? Why are
Right. What's the point?
Right. And what's wonderful about this ancient approach to geometry is that it's all relevant.
Exactly.
Why do you want this? Well, because it will help you understand relationships.
And even the way you run your business.
Yes.
Right? Right. It's incredible. It's really it's just that all those people, all those kids that were traumatized, and I'm serious, traumatized by math, there's probably a quarter of them, completely flunked or don't get it otherwise. And that leads to a lifetime of therapy. It leads to a whole idea as a failure. And that right there is wrong, because so many kids are not passing the test in math and they are labeled a failure. And that leads to drugs, to violence and therapy the rest of your life.
Well, and the proof is in the pudding of what I've experienced over the last 40 years of teaching this stuff. There's always somebody who cries in my classes. And once I saw it
in a good way,
healing way, they were crying because all of a sudden it made sense. And I was by giving them a positive experience, I was bringing up and helping release the trauma of what happened in that class. And so I started saying at the beginning of all my classes, welcome to a clinic for the healing of math abuse and geometry distress.
Love it. So why is this? So
the reason I'm saying that, and then I say something about this is what usually happens when you get to a point where you've had a beautiful experience or transformative or something, and you start to feel like you're going to cry because you finally understand it, or it makes sense, or it's relevant, or you see how it applies to your life. I tell them, I'm giving you permission now to cry, because this is a clinic for the healing of math distress and geometry abuse.
I love it. I would say, I think it's number one also to change the educational system. I really think that will change the world, because if you teach all these kids, I mean, in a different way. So they're in their body, they're connected to nature, they're connected to each other, they're at peace. It's going to change everybody that they are in contact the rest of their life. That's really the way to change the world right there.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us what's an overview of what's your presentation about?
Well, the title says it actually.
Mhm.
Sacred geometry shows us, and then the answer, everything that matters. So,
Oh,
yeah. So that's basically where I'm going. And I thought that, it would be cool to offer this. I know most of the other presenters are going to be talking about sound healing and the actual techniques and stuff, right? And so what I wanted to do was say, hey, all of that is based on understanding geometry. Because every time there's vibration, there's geometry. So let's look at that. And so I'm showing how I give a lot of the basic principles and the different aspects of it and the different parts of the world that applies to. And then about the second half is sort of here's how it applies to art and architecture and society and blah, 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 and all this stuff.
uh,
So that's kind of where we're going.
yeah. Really, it's all about vibration. I mean, there's sound, but we talk about sound, but it's really vibration at all levels of reality. And geometry is absolutely a critical aspect of vibration in the universe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Two are synonymous, and that's sort of that's one of the big messages. Whenever everything is vibrating, all matter, all energy, everything's vibrating. It's vibrating in all sorts of different qualities or speeds and whenever there is vibration, there's geometry. That's the huge missing piece.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's take a look at your presentation here.
All right. Have fun, folks. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Richard Feather Anderson, and I'm here to share a talk with you titled, What Sacred Geometry Shows Us? Everything That Matters. So just to give you an overview of what I want to do here, sound healing, of course, is a pioneering new field, and it's put forth a new worldview that everything is vibration. Well, from my perspective as a sacred geometers have been studying geometry that we know is the result of vibration for thousands of years. So there's a lot of information here that could be very useful. So I'm going to be talking about what sacred geometry is all about, what it does for us, how it creates the material world, what sacred geometry shows us about the nature of the universe and the physical world, and how we can use it to guide our own creations so the result is harmony, beauty, and peacefulness. So it's really, I'll be going into not talking about sound healing at all, but about the underpinnings of what you can understand, what more you can understand about the nature of vibration, which is the whole basis of sound healing. So welcome to a feast for your body, mind, and heart, a taste of the smorgasbord of creation that is sacred geometry, which can open up the doors to understanding how everything in the material world is created and how it all works. So this is going to be a whirlwind overview, and I'm going to be using excerpts from a lot of the sacred geometry classes I teach, the one at Globe and the ones I do on my own. And if this piques your interest, I'm converting currently about 40 years of in-person classes to online videos. So if you go to my website, you can find out about that. And you can sign up for my newsletter to find out when I'm posting new classes. So, but let's just get right into it. So I'm going to switch over to the keynote presentation and get going with that. So what sacred geometry shows us? Everything that matters. What is sacred geometry? Well, the first thing I want to say, and I say in all my classes, is that, it's not that class that we had in usually 10th grade, that geometry class. It's not a branch of mathematics at all. It doesn't even resemble the high school geometry class that many of us had. It's really a branch of philosophy and cosmology. That's a much better way to think about it. In fact, in the ancient world, they thought of it as the physics, what we now call physics. So that may give you a better understanding of why it's all about studying the how vibration is created by geometry. It's also nature's only way to create relationships in space. And Pythagoras called it a study of order in space, and I sort of expand that to its study of the inherent order that the ancients were seeing in everything in the world, and particularly in nature, within how things are arranged, how objects are arranged in space. And what does it do for us? Well, just about everything. It guides energy into matter. It gives a sense of identity to form. It creates harmony and coherence and gives us a way to proportion buildings using that understanding of how to create harmony and coherence so that we create buildings that keep humans in harmony with ourselves, with nature, and the cosmos. So let's just tick off some of those items and go right into the first one here of how geometry gives identity to form. So you may notice the spirals is a clockwise and counterclockwise spiral right there in that cactus. And here's another example of a succulent plant that you may know of as hens and chickens. And again, you see from the drawing that makes it a little easier to see the spirals going clockwise and counterclockwise, the double spirals that are in that. And what those spirals show us from the perspective of sacred geometry is what I call the geometry code of that particular succulent plant. So this particular one has 5 of these spiral arcs going in one direction and 8 in another. So the geometry code for this particular species of plant is a 5 to 8 ratio or relationship. And it's the same for every plant in that species. And that is what, that's why I call it the geometry code. It tells basically the plant who it is and how to behave and what, so it's part of the identity of that particular hens and chickens succulent plant. Here's another example. Daisy flowers are doing the same thing, sunflowers. So you can see the spirals going in 2 directions there. And here's a drawing that makes it even clearer to see that. And then the numbers for this one, the ratio is 21 to 34 are the number of the spiral arcs going in the clockwise and counterclockwise direction. And that's the geometry code for this particular daisy plant. Pine cones is and cactus are another example. And it's easiest to see that if you turn the pine cone to its base, to the bottom. And it's the easiest way to look and see all of those spirals there. So another thing geometry does for us is that it creates coherence. And it does that by creating a coherence or a unity between the inner structure and the outer form of lots of things. So let's use the water molecule as an example. It has a hexagonal geometry. And so when water, is in a situation where it's cold and it's freezing into frost crystals or into snowflakes, it forms the 6-pointed star that we're all familiar with from looking at those or seeing pictures of them. And that's a result of this rule, this law of the universe, that the outer form can only come out of whatever the inner geometry is, in this case, at the molecular level. So the outer form can only exist in harmony with the inner structure. There's really no free will choice when we look at nature through the lens of sacred geometry. The geometry, by doing that, produces this unity or cohesiveness or coherence in between the inner essence, the molecular structure of the geometry of the water molecule, and the outer form of the snowflake or the frost crystal. So all over the universe, we have this, we just keep seeing over and over again that all matter and all energy are vibrations. Our universe is an immense field of vibrations. And one example is planets are emitting radio frequencies that travel across space, and there's all sorts of other examples as well. On the micro level, it's showing up at the subatomic level, the geometry of various atoms and elements. All the waves and particles of matter have geometrical patterns or signatures, again, which I like to call the geometry code. So the molecules, the atoms, the elements, they vibrate at particular beats per second, particular types, particular rates of vibration. And the geometry pattern, here I'm showing the tungsten atom, is showing something about the essence of this particular type of matter. So again, I like to call it the geometry code. Another example of everything is vibrating. The sun's radiating magnetic waves at particular frequencies. They collide with the Earth's magnetic field. And that's what creates the beautiful displays of the aurora borealis. And I love this second picture, which most of us, if we're not astronauts, don't get a chance to see, of why it's called an aurora borealis. It's a crown. It's a circle above the polar region. So one of the main things that geometry does is that it guides energy into matter. And to understand that whole thing, we need to understand that whenever anything is vibrating, it's automatically, simultaneously creating a geometrical pattern. You can't have a vibration without having geometry. So that's really the underlying message of this presentation. So let's look at, you're probably familiar with the Chladni plates that Ernst Chladni came up with a way of showing just that, how all matter is vibrating, whether we're talking about energy or light or sound or electricity or this steel plate that he would set into vibration by strumming it with a violin bow and cover the plate with sand or other very light powders that can be agitated by the plate once it gets into starts vibrating, starts resonating from the violin bows strumming on it, and the sand the vibration is sort of making the sand jump up and down off of the plate, and it doesn't like that, and it finds the still places and goes and rests there. Oh, and then that what that reveals is the geometrical nature of that particular material, because you get these nodal lines showing up where the still spots where the sand comes to rest shows us the inner geometry of that. And same sort of thing can be demonstrated, happens also in liquids, and that's the whole science of cymatics that Hans Jenny developed at the suggestion of Rudolf Steiner, is one of his teachers. So the geometrical pattern that you see there depends on what kind of substance there is. Again, every substance has a different geometry code, a different signature, will create different geometrical patterns. And that gives us a picture, really, where we can see what the inner nature of that particular material is. I think this one might be paraffin. I can't remember, but here's how these are created. Imagine that you have a drum head and it has a very thin rubber membrane stretched across it, and then you pour whatever your water or your alcohol or your turpentine or your liquid paraffin or whatever substance you want to see the inner geometry on. You pour that in there, it makes a little dimple, a little pool, puddle. And then you start exciting the cymoscope, that rubber membrane, with sound is one of the easy ways to do that. And and the liquid starts to bubble, sort of like the lava pits or the mud pits at Yellowstone or things like that. And it sets up a recurring pattern, a regular repeating pattern, and with the way the bubbles are oscillating, and they build up over time a complex symmetry pattern, a geometry. And what's really cool about this is that that pattern, that geometry, is going to change depending on what the frequency is of the sound. Here's an example of 22.2 hertz. And it's going to be different for each material because of the inner geometry that it's cohering to, and also the how tight the membrane, how tight the rubber surface is that the water is on. All three of those things are going to be factors in what kind of geometry you see showing up here. So here's another example at 28 hertz. And look at the different. It's just a tiny change in the vibration, and this is an 8-fold pattern, and the 22.2 is a 5-fold pattern. That's telling you something about the nature of the substance, and the frequency, and its inner, revealing to us something that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise. The inner nature of that. Of that matter. So I like to think of sacred geometry as the music of the universe, or the music of matter. In other words, it's the universe is a series of vibratory intervals and vibrational relationships. They're just humming along as they create and hold together the material world. And sacred geometry shows us those resonance patterns, those waveforms, those vibrations of the material world that we wouldn't see otherwise. So we can see and hear the geometry of the world we're living in. So another way that geometry reveals things that we may be missing otherwise without employing it is the creation stories, the creation myths from all various cultures. I've really been exploring the Genesis creation story, which is, the paradigm worldview creating story of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They all have a similar basis to that, of it starting with the 6 or 7 days of creation. But these creation stories they're not just mythology. It's really the metaphors in these stories are telling us something about the cosmology, the worldview, the paradigm of each culture, and how they understand the principles of the universe. It also includes a lot of philosophy of how to live right, how to live in harmony with others, and understand the world that we're living in. And so, but to get at that level, really helps or need to be employing sacred geometry to understand it, to convert the words into geometrical images. And these stories were created in a time before written language, when cultures were all the information was passed on in oral tradition, and storytellers are typically painting word pictures. And in the ancient world, a lot of what they were describing was for people who knew how to and would be just automatically changing the words into visual images in their inner view screen that are geometrical. So this is the drawing I have here is in the Platonic Pythagorean traditions called the flower of creation. You may know it as called the flower of life, but it's also could be called, and I prefer to call it the flower of creation, because it is the image that is described in the Genesis creation story, if you know how to read the story through the lens of sacred geometry. So let's just look at some other things that creation stories tell us. about the nature of the creator who created the creation. So in physics, modern physics, particularly the branch of cosmological physics, has been calling the universe for a while a singularity. And we're going to see something very similar. For instance, in Islam, the word Allah means the one, or a single something, a single identity, a single entity, a single consciousness. A lot of world mythology, early Earth-centered cultures around the world would have the Earth Mother or an Earth Mother goddess or Gaia as the name for the creator. The Ouroboros is one of the oldest images that goes with creation stories, a serpent biting its own tail, which is a metaphor, a visual metaphor for there's no beginning or ending. In other words, a singularity. So these are all symbols of a singular state of consciousness, a unity consciousness. And when all there is a singularity, one of the things is that this is telling us is there's nothing else. So if we represent this one or this singularity by a circle, it can help us understand that if all there is a single circle, there is no other. There are not other circles. There are not whole clusters of things. There's no flower of creation. There's a whole collection of different circles. It's just a single serpent biting its own tail because there's no other tails to bite. So you get the idea. So thoughts of other in these stories have to be thoughts in the mind of the one because there is no other. And so in Hinduism, they would call this the causal realm, the state of nothing, of no things, of nothingness, of stillness before the creation is launched. My teacher, Keith Critchlow, said that you can reduce most of the ancient creation stories to a single statement, a simple statement of the one becomes two, or oneness or unity or singularity becomes a state of two-ness. So the material world is real, that we know, is a state of lots and lots of things. It's a state of diversity. And to manifest what the creation stories are, when you are really saying, is that in order to make that material world possible, to create it, to manifest it, requires a transition from that state of singularity, there's nothing else, into a state of two-ness, or into a state of polarity, or lots and lots of things or diversity. Now, it's really interesting when the other thing I've been doing playing with creation stories is to, particularly in the Genesis story, is to go to what Hebrew speakers tell me is really there, and sort of get rid of the various mistranslations that have come along over time. And so one of those, when you read Genesis in English and it says God created, in the beginning God created the world, that's not what it says in the Hebrew. And a very significant piece of that is that the word that God translated as God in Hebrew is Elohim. Now that is very curious because it is the word for one or singularity, like Allah or Elah. And I forget exactly what the Hebrew word is, but what's in the chapter 1 of Genesis is Elohim, which is the plural form of the word for one. Well, that's quite an interesting paradox. And I prefer to translate that as the one in the all or the one in the many, to say it's a singularity that has within it everything that's possible, has all the diversity that is possible within it. Oh, and the image I have there, which helps us understand that, you have one circle which divides itself or expands or reflects itself out into a second circle. And once you have that, in that overlapping space of the it's called the ves capiscus, that lens shaped, you can put another circle inside of that. and it shows you that's giving the radius to be able to put two circles inside of the one circle, and that you may recognize from Asian cultures as the Tai Chi 2, or what we call the yin yang symbol. And that is another way of understanding how one can be two at the same time, how there are two smaller circles inside of the bigger circle, expressing that diversity and plurality and everything that's there. So the next thing that comes in that story is that the one has the ability to subdivide itself, and now this subdivide, that's a geometrical term. So I'm pulling out of looking at the story from the perspective of sacred geometry to pull out extra meaning here. When the one becomes two, automatically, and when one circle called the source circle is duplicates itself by another circle that moves on, that has its center on the circumference of the first one. And that's the rule for creating sacred geometry drawings, by the way. If all you have is the one and there's nothing else, you can't create a circle somewhere else, except on the from the circumference of, or the boundary or the limits of that first circle. So that's called the reflected circle, and it automatically, when the one circle subdivides itself into or duplicates it into a second circle of the same size, the same identity, this lens-shaped or viscous area is created automatically. It's not 1, 2, and then 3. It's 1, 2 simultaneously. The third shape or space is created as a result of dividing itself into one. Now that viscous shape in the ancient Greek world was referred to as the mother of form. And the reason for that is that within that shape, that lens shape of the viscous, it holds all of the ratios for all the vibrations for all the different geometries and forms that we have in this physical world. So all of the this drawing is showing all of the polygons coming out of that. There's a equilateral triangle and a square and a pentagon and a hexagon, et cetera, all being generated out of the one circle becoming two, creating this third shape. And also within the other reason it's called the mother of form is that within that shape, that lens shape, is also held what's called the root harmonies, which are the building blocks of the material world. And so this is a drawing that just shows the root harmonies inside of that, but let's just do a little primer here on what I'm talking about. The root harmonies, if you're not familiar with them, are the set of relationships that exist, and it starts off with a square shape, and the relationship of the root 2 is the relationship between the length of the side of the square, any of them, they're all the same, to the diagonal of that square. So the diagonal line, of course, is a little bit longer than the side of the square, and the precise way of saying that, according to the Pythagorean theorem, is square root of 2, which is about 1.4141, to give you an idea, just a little bit less than 1.5. Okay, so if you take that diagonal of the square and you, with a compass, swing it down out of the square and extend the base of the square, you get to a rectangle now, whose long side is square root of 2 and short side is 1. And then there's a diagonal, of course, that's inside of that root 2 rectangle. And using the Pythagorean theorem, you find out that that distance is square root of 3. So you can extend that out and expand to a square root of 3 rectangle. And inside of it is a root 4 rectangle. And you can expand that to get a root 4 rectangle, which you can see here is what we call a double square in sacred geometry. It's there's a square sitting right there side by side with our original square. So that square root of 4 is 2 mathematically, is actually shows a rectangle that's twice as long as it is wide. And that relates to music and sound healing as well, because that is the way of depicting the octave, which we'll come back to that later and show some other ways of showing the musical intervals geometrically. So, so there's the whole set of root harmonies, and the way we talk about them is that the root 2 begets the root 3 or gives birth to the root 4 to the root 5, 6, 7, et cetera, et cetera. And there they all are again being generated inside of the vesicapiscus, and they have that little place where that, if you were to make this into a lyre, take a string and go from the point up here to the opposite point down here, you would get a length as well. But anyway, those are, and you get a length across here. Here's a root 2 rectangle that's 1/2 of the size of the one that you get when you expand it out to here and get that one. Anyway, a lot of information in there just to say that this vesicapiscus shape is pretty phenomenal, pretty important. And it really, when you convert the words of the story into the word pictures, into the geometry, you start to see the deeper level of what they're talking about. So so that all actually takes place because of correcting another mistranslation. The word day is not in the Genesis story. In the Hebrew, that word that got translated today actually means interval or steps or stages in a process of creation in this case. And in the world of geometry, whenever you hear the word interval, or in the ancient world where geometry is the basis of understanding the nature and the physical world, people knew that. So if you were hearing to the storyteller telling this in oral tradition, the world was created in 6 stages, with a 7th stage of rest or return. You would automatically be imagining this flower of creation, which is created from a circle subdividing itself into 6 intervals. And here is and the other thing that is shown here, when you subdivide that and subdivide it by putting walking. Well, let me go to the next image here. Here's a way to understand the idea of interval. The space between, in sacred geometry, the interval is a space between the 2 adjacent points, like that, on a circle. And to divide the circle into 6 intervals, as the story says, you use the radius. It's the same, the radius of any circle you can walk it around the original circle 6 times to come right back to where you were before. And so it subdivides that circumference or boundary of the circle into 6 intervals or segments, equal segments. And it creates what's called a symmetry pattern, a 6-fold symmetry pattern in geometry language. And so this reveals a deeper understanding at a deeper level understanding the cosmic principles that are being described here as what's necessary in order to manifest a material world. So it gets really interesting when, and this I do in my class on interpreting the creation story using geometry, when I'm just going to show a couple examples here to show you, maybe get you excited about how neat it is to explore this story this way through this lens. So in the first stage, which we've all read as the first day, basically the one circle becomes two circles. The source circle reflects itself out. You move from singularity to polarity, and the viscous is created, and so it sets the stage for everything to get come into a material form. The movement from singularity to polarity is required. The one must become two-ness. We must move from singularity where there is no other into having others to set the stage for materializing into motion. So what happens on the third step of this whole process is one of these places where if you're not following the story by drawing the flower of creation or looking at it, you're missing how astounding what's going on in the story. So on the third stage is when the first shape, it's another vesica, but a very little skinny one. And in geometry language, we refer to that as a petal or a seed. And what the text is saying at this point is, and God said, let the earth bring forth vegetation, the herb yielding seed after its kind, in other words, according to its own nature, according to its geometry code, what is within it, at the molecular level or whatever. So the identity is condensed into a seed that's holding all of its geometry code or genetic code. And there we have that. This is the first time in the drawing of the we get up to a third circle, and that's the first time that you see this little geometry shape that's called the seed appear. That's pretty cool. And then when we get to the fifth stage, there's another one I really like. That's where we have 4 of these little seeds or petal shapes showing up. And the text is saying, and God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let waterfowl, fly above the earth in the open firmament of the heaven. And I put in translations for what these words mean in Hebrew. The living creatures is ideas, and the firmament is principles, laws of the universe, laws of physics, laws of nature. Firmament of the heaven, in bringing this into a spiritual understanding. And God blessed it all, and saying, may it be fruitful and multiply. In other words, following the genetic code to create other beings in its own kind. And the other symbol that you may be seeing here also is looks like the trident of Neptune. And this stage of the development is talking about the waters that bring forth these different creatures. And they're bringing forth from the below world into the upper world. This is the first time we get a petal into the conscious world from the subconscious world below. So all various understandings that you can get when you start augmenting the understanding of the story with the geometrical images. So what else does sacred geometry tell us about the creation process? Well, remember I was saying that from the sacred geometry worldview, the universe is a resonant field of vibratory relationships. Whenever something vibrates, there's automatically geometry. And so the next thing to explore is to look at one of the main thing that geometry does of guiding energy into matter, and how does that happen? Well, when vibrating energy is organized in a coherent way, as in a geometrical grid, like what's shown here, the energy is stabilized. And it turns out that that's what is required to guide energy into matter. You have to go from a state of chaotic. So sort of, we can demonstrate this with sound. It's sort of as if you're going from all sorts of sound and going into a state of where there are several different intervals of sound happening at the same time, but being coherent and interrelated and related to each other through the laws of sacred geometry. So another way of saying this is that a vibratory resonance pattern, which is what this image is called in physics. This is an image, by the way, of platinum, that the material platinum, and we're looking at about 300,000 times magnification at the subatomic level. And so this vibratory resonance pattern creates a set of nodes and antinodes, stillness, places of stillness and places of quiet, of rest, like the steel plate that we looked at in the Chladni patterns, in a fixed grid of relationships within the pulsing waves of energy and that allows the energy to become matter. So let's look a little deeper here, and a little larger image. And right off the bat, what you're probably seeing is you're noticing all the symmetry here, that these black dots are the same distance from each other and from the center, creating a square, and the same thing with other squares, and there's all kinds of patterns in there, but it's all mirror image symmetry kind of stuff going on. So that's one way of creating order. And the other thing this shows us is that it's kind of like, it's showing the vibration, the waves, the waveforms being moving out from whatever this impulse is, and kind of, can understand this by thinking about throwing the pebbles into a pond and making the ripples. Except in this case, we're throwing a whole handful of pebbles of different sizes, and they're making small splashes and big splashes, and that they're all sending these ripples of waveforms out away from that explosion point. And notice that the ripples, as they move out, start to break up a bit. At first, they are complete concentric circles. And then as they get out here, they start intersecting interacting with each other. And so here's some arrows to help us visualize that moving outward. But then there's these places where these concentric circle ripples sort of break up into little bits. And that, my friends, is one of physics' best understandings of what matter is. It's the little bits that have separated out from the overall waveforms, and they've moved from wave to particle. So another way to sort of sum up how geometry guides is the thing that's necessary to guide energy into matter to make a physical world is that matter is a geometrized light energy. In other words, an energy stabilized and held in a form by geometry. And that is the way that Robert Lawler, in his very excellent Sacred Geometry book, describes how to think about matter. And basically what this is telling us is that without geometry, the physical world wouldn't exist. It's only that's geometry is what makes it possible for existence to exist, is the way that I like to say that. And this is the greatest mystery of our universe, and it's the secret formula for the eternal creation of the universe. So one last image to sort of pull things together here is that when you can take the root harmony series of the square begetting the root 2 and the root 2 begetting the root 3 and giving birth to the root 4 and etc. And if you place that at scale over this subatomic resonance pattern, you find out that those ripples are not just moving out into space at some random sequence or intervals or distance from each other, that they are moving out according to the root harmonies. So another reason why we call them the building blocks of matter, the specific technique that our universe uses to hold together and stabilize the vibration so that it becomes matter, is to regulate those ripples of vibration according to the root harmony sequence. It's one of those kind of realizations, okay? So being in harmony is actually the original natural state of matter. It's how the material universe got started, is that those ripples of vibrations are in perfect, harmonious, vibrational relationships to each other according to the root harmonies. So may we be as wise enough to abide by this principle. And so this leads us then to, with that as a foundation of understanding, you can take this and start applying it to all sorts of different aspects of life, and look at the practical applications of all of that. So the kind of the way to think about how to apply sacred geometry wisdom is to really understand, why it's important, understand how important the root harmonies really are, and using them to guide our creation of art and architecture, or anything really, gives us a way to create beautiful art in which all the parts are in harmony with each other and the whole, and in harmony with the universe and the whole foundation, or the whole inception, the beginning, how this material world was created. And so that's why we get things like Goethe saying that architecture is frozen music. I like to think of it as resonant architecture. To create environments that, and this gives us a way to create environments that feel better to live in and bring us into harmony with ourselves and with with nature and with the order of the universe. So one of the main ways of doing this is actually one of the simplest possible ways of doing it, is to the understanding that we can generate all the possible harmonious relationships of space and sound and matter and energy by understanding one of the main rules of our universe, that everything is generated by dividing the circle or the sphere, the unity, the singularity, the beginning point, by the numbers 2, 3, and 5, and their multiples. And that creates all the geometrical shapes. So here's a circle divided by 2 and 4 to create the square, by 3 and 6 to create equilateral triangles, Star of David, by circle divided by 5 to create pentagons, and 5-pointed and 10-pointed stars. So it generates this process of dividing the circle or sphere by 2, 3, and 5 and its multiples, generates the root harmony ratios, the essential relationships for polygons and polyhedra, and even the basis of the atomic table. Each column is a different one of these geometrical relationships in the table of elements. And for practical application, it provides geometrical relationships and proportional systems to create beauty in all of our art and architecture. And so let's look at some examples here from Islamic patterning, creating mosaic patterns, or what's called the space-filling grids in Islamic art. They're all regulated by the root harmonies. And so here's an example. Here's the root 2 principle that creates the square polygon, gives us the number 4 and 8. And here's an example of beautiful geometrical art patterns And in Islamic art, those are said to represent the order in time and space, relates to the four directions. Here's an example from the root 3 grid, produces the equilateral triangle and the hexagon, the vesicapiscus, the flower of creation, 12-fold symmetry patterns. That's all coming out of the root 3 grid in that particular geometry. And is in Islamic art said to represent stages in the creative process or the natural division of whole systems. So it gives you what that does is gives you ideas of what purpose or intention you could express by using the 6 or 12-fold symmetry patterns. And then the number 5, when that divides the circle, it creates a 5-pointed star, which is the golden ratio proportion being experienced, or the call it a phi grid. The Greek letter phi is another way of saying the golden ratio, and represents the growth of organisms, since most of the plants and animals on planet Earth, their bodies are being guided into form by the golden ratio. So this also can lead to number symbolism, and derived from the qualities of these various polygons and stuff. So the symbolism of 4 is derived from, in sacred geometry numerology, from the qualities of the square and the octagon, which are associated with the material world, the earth, the 4 directions, how time and space is divided up, sense of being grounded, solid, stable. These are all qualities of the square, the octagon. Dependability, knowing what's coming, which comes from just knowing the sun is rising in the east, setting in the west, et cetera, and the power of manifest. These are all things that, if you want more information on this, my Geometry as a Symbolic Language class goes into this more deeply and more slowly. So dividing, but here's just a taste of how this gets developed. Dividing the circle by 4, the first thing that happens is not the square, it's the cross. When you have these 4 points and you connect them through the center, it creates a cross. And then the ends of those cross, you can connect those and create the square. And then that cross becomes the diagonals of the square, which is that root 2 principle or relationship related to the side of the square. And this is a symbol for manifestation or incarnation. The cross is, or the number 4. And because it's referring to the cross, and 4 points, created by 4 points, created a subdivision by 4 of the circle. And so why is it called the symbol of incarnation? Well, because to get born in the physical world, you have to pick a specific time and space. And the cross basically is X marks the spot. It's saying I'm intending to incarnate, to come into form at this time and this place. And so that's also why that is used as the natal birth chart. So another way to think of this, of nature as a crossing instead of the mathematical multiplication of a number, to think of it geometrically as a crossing of equal vertical and horizontal lines, which makes a tangible surface. And some examples of crossings are matter and spirit creates life, male and female creates a baby, warp and weft creates a textile, a cloth surface, dark and light creates shadow, which makes things visible. A white owl is when there's no shadow and you can't see anything. So you have to have to bring together dark and light to see anything. The number 4 is also representing the 4 directions. And, the archaeologists, anthropologists say that they think that is the first sense of order that ancient humans had, that the sun was rising in the east, setting in the west, every day, getting to its highest point at noon in the south, casting a shadow to the north, or you could see the north at night with in the northern hemisphere with a single point of light and all the others moving around it. Okay, so this gave them a sense of order, stability, all those qualities we just looked at with the square. So going on with the number 3, that comes out of understanding the essence of a triangle, which is an expression of harmony and ease and the mediation of polar opposites. It's the most stable form, why we use it for roof trusses and bridges. And then the nature of 5 comes from the circle divided into 5 and creating the pentagon and the 5-pointed star. And that 5-pointed star, every time the lines of that star pattern cross each other, they subdivide themselves into more expressions of the golden ratio. So I call this figure a perfectly tuned symphony of nothing but golden ratio relationships. And that's why the Pythagoreans used it as a symbol for perfected humanity. And Plato used it as a symbol. Actually, he used the three-dimensional form of it, the dodecahedron, as a symbol of the cosmos. So basically what I'm saying is that, and here's some more qualities of the number 5, which are coming in this system from just observing the qualities of the polygon. And this pentagonal shape is also associated with Venus because the Venus retrograde pattern seen from outer space moves around planet Earth and creates a 5-pointed star as well. So now we have the goddess of love and beauty associated with the number 5. And in astrology, actually, we could go through all the numbers this way, but if you're born with planets in sort of 5 evenly spaced spots in the sky, you're called a master integrator, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a little insight into how you can think about numbers and numerology, which can play into all sorts of things. You help with creating all kinds of things in the world, art and architecture. And all right, so let's move on to something a little closer to sound healing, which is thinking of music as geometrical ratios in motion. And again, geometry can help us understand a lot of the theoretical concepts in relationships of different sounds, different vibrations, frequencies in music. So the plucked strings vibrating with this image produced by a stroboscope, you can see that the string is vibrating over its entire length, but also over half its length. And that's why when you put your finger on a guitar string and get that little ping that's an octave higher, already you can bring that out because it's already there. So this gives us a way, geometry gives us a way to see these intervals that we're hearing in music. And the same principle that we have in creating the polygons and polyhedras by dividing by 2, 3, and 5 also exists in creating the musical harmonies of all the intervals and overtones and everything, from dividing the length of a string or the column of air by these whole numbers, 2, 3, and 5, their multiples. And that creates relationships that are simple whole number ratios, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, etc. And this is the way it's usually shown with the different divisions of the string, creating all these different intervals. And here's the geometry way of doing it, of hearing it and seeing it and being able to measure it, all using all the senses to understand. Here they have the bridge at the halfway point, which creates half of the string vibrating twice as fast as the whole string. And here's the geometry way of showing it, the double squares again, where you put 2 circles in there and see that they're twice as 2 circles long and 1 circle wide. It's a 2 to 1 ratio. that creates the octave. And so this is the way in the classes I do at Globe, I convert these different intervals, which are pretty conceptual, intellectual understanding, to a geometrical understanding. So here's the 2/3 of the string compared to the whole string, creating the perfect fifth. And here's a way to understand it as a rectangle that is relationship of 2 to 3, 2 quarters or circles by 3 quarters long. And so let's just go through a bunch of them. Here's a perfect fourth, a 3 to 4 relationship, gives a little squatter rectangle. Here's the major sixth, showing 3/5 of the string compared to the whole, and creates a skinnier. So that's another thing that geometry can be very useful to us, to give us a way of really being able to grab and grasp with our senses these sort of conceptual ratios that we use to talk about the specific, the relationship between the different intervals, the different levels of vibration, the different frequencies of sound. Now, the same sort of thing used to be done in architecture up until about the 1920s, when it sort of all got thrown out. But let's explore architecture as frozen music. And so in the Renaissance, architects were using musical intervals to proportion the buildings, the facades, the front of the buildings, the rooms, the length and width and heights of the rooms, and the windows, and this is all based on the fact that both the musical harmonics and the spatial geometrical harmonics are based on the division of the 1 by 2, 3, and 5. By the way, harmonics, the word harmonics, today we mostly think of in terms of music, but in the ancient world, they would have been visualizing geometrical rectangles, geometrical relationships as well. So musical theory was applied to architecture to create harmonious compositions. And here's an example from Claude Bragdon's Frozen Fountain book, where he's showing various different windows, and that are all musical intervals, octaves, and basically the thing that's really that I find amazing about this is that this is another way of creating harmony and coherence and unity between things, because they would do things like figure out what proportion, which ratios they wanted to use for a particular space, because it was in harmony with the intention of how they were going to use that space, which is why the understanding the numerology is very helpful. And then they would figure that out, and then they would proportion the everything in the space, including the windows. So you'd be looking out of that, say, a root 2 proportioned space through a root 2 proportioned window into the world. So really wonderful way of creating harmony. And you can use that same principle using the musical intervals, these whole number ratios. There is a way that used to be used in architecture where you could take any rectangle, any a space of a room of any shape, even if it's not one of the root harmonies, like most of the places that we live into today, you can still create harmony in that space, and how you arrange the furniture or subdivide the space. This I do in my class on sacred architecture and using geometry. So here's a grid that gives you a whole bunch of different nodal points that are in harmony with all the other points in the space. And here's an example of a building I designed about 20 years ago that was a guest house over a garage. And I just did this intuitively and what felt beautiful to me. And then when I was done, I put the grid on it to see if I was on the right track and found that I had a lot of division in thirds and fourths that sort of came through for this particular this client. And the same thing can be done with art, with mandalas, the rose windows in the Gothic cathedrals. Where these circles and all these different shapes are placed is not accidental. They're all in a harmonious grid. And so the intersections of this 12-pointed star are giving all the points where the centers and edges and the circles are all being done, brought together. And then I'm currently decoding a building on the UC Berkeley campus. Used to be the school for the deaf and blind. And this is a root 2 rectangle subdivided into, because the root 2 naturally subdivides itself harmoniously into a rectangle 1/2 its size. The root 2 divides into 2, the root 3 divides into 3, the root 4 divides into 4. That's the formula for harmony and beauty. And that's basically what this building is doing. So really, really cool. And now another place where music and architecture sort of come together is that there used to be these set of principles, the law of 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And so the law of 1 was having coherence between the different shapes, so that you have these similar sort of designs, golden ratio proportioning, the triangular roofs at the same, you got the rectangle and the triangles and all these different forms repeated over and over again to create coherence. The law of consonants, you may recognize here that we're using musical language here because the ancient world saw no difference between principles of beauty and architecture and music. So sounding with, being in resonance with consonants could be done in architecture by repeating motifs at different sizes, different scales. These conical roof shapes at the same angles sort of help all these different parts resonate together and feel like they're all part of the same building. Here's the Gothic arches being 2 of them or 3 of them being put inside of a larger one. That's another example of sort of variation on the theme we have in music applied to architecture. The law of 3 is really, really important. 3 elements vertically as well as horizontally is a way to create an order and beauty with the buildings. And then another way that this was applied, and this is my last example, to sort of bring it into the human world as well. The Greeks may have been the first to apply the golden ratio of geometry land to human affairs in terms of the golden ratio. So in geometry and architecture and art, we treat all the different elements or parts of a work of art, of a design, so that they're in harmony with each other. And the golden ratio, the golden rule of treating other people the way you want them to treat you is that same principle basically being applied now to the world of human relationships. And Plato's Republic, by the way, is a utopian vision based on sacred geometry. Okay, so hopefully this little fast smorgasbord ride, whirlwind ride through geometry piqued your interest, and hopefully the universe will never look the same, and that you'll have some insight and inspiration to start looking, using sacred geometry to understand everything in the material world on a deeper level. And I always like to give you outlets for going further if this is exciting you or inspiring you. you can go to my website, which is just my name, richardfeatheranderson.com, and sign up on the mail list so I can give you notices about when these pre-recorded online classes are made available. I'm just starting to work on this, and there are a bunch of videos there on lots of other subjects already available. Okay, so that's just a drop in the vast pond of sacred geometry. And that's it for me. All righty. Thank you for your attention.
Wow, Richard. I mean, oh my God, it's like such an expansive view in an hour of the whole universe. It's like, bing, right? Oh my God. So
That took a lot of work. I've never given a talk that or taken on the goal of doing one that was that broad and trying to do it in an hour. Woof.
yeah, it's really cool because I don't think anybody's ever heard of root harmonies or hardly knows what it is, right? And it's such a critical aspect, right? But
Mhm.
I want to kind of begin with why this is all important. And I can give you my take on it.
Yes, please.
Okay. So it's interesting. You know, I've got in my book a hierarchy of vibration where I look at frequencies, a bunch of frequencies, which is oneness to two-ness, right? And then the relationship between frequencies, which is musical interval relationship, and then musical flow, where you add time and change things over time. And that's the basis of all music. And I've expanded that into the whole of all vibration, including geometry. So I think of geometry as the frequency. See what you think about this, because I'm just making it up. Okay, I got the circle, which is the frequency. A bunch of circles make all of the geometries in the universe, which are the timbre, which is a combination of frequencies. The relationship of two geometries can be two geometry relationships or the sides within the geometry, or the relationship of the root harmonies to each other. And then if you start moving geometries in space, which nature does a lot, and or even spinning them, you now get a whole nother level. But then there's a fifth level of adding energy and intention. So through all five of those levels, what I've learned is what's all that matters for us is peace at all levels.
Mhm.
Because peace is good for you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It's a portal to other dimensions where you're one with the universe. It's even, where you're the most creative. So I think of peace at the frequency level as a stable vibrating frequency versus a chaotic frequency. So instead of, it's more like a sine wave. At the timbre level, the most warmest sound is a chord where the harmonics in the chord are a beautiful chord of the harmonics itself in the sound, right? So it's like a warm sound would be like a harp, although dissonant sounds can be good for breaking up things. Generally, we think of the warm sounds as the one that create the most peace. And then in the musical interval relationship, musical intervals such as the musical fifth or the octave, those create the most harmony, or a chord that it creates a beautiful chord versus a dissonant chord. And then at the music level and at the energy level, it's all about flow, smooth flow without blockages. And those are 5 levels of peace in the hierarchy of vibration. So when I look at geometry, especially sacred geometry, and see the patterns behind it, I completely think of those harmonies or symmetry. Symmetry is probably the number one. Symmetry creates peace. there's something about it that creates peace and harmony by even looking at it. What do you think? And what would you like to add? Or
I'm
shift? Or shift? What's that?
I'm scribbling notes like crazy here. Okay, so here's my first reaction. Let me preface what I'm going to say, because it gets back to basically the theme of the talk. Why does it matter? Why does sacred geometry matter? And so I'm going to give another illustration of that by answering this, or responding to your idea here. So I'm thinking, well, what does sacred geometry tell me about peace at a deeper level? What is below peace? Okay. And that's basically where sacred geometry always has me going. I don't think I've ever taught this at the school, because it's more, I know it from my architecture practice and design, and I'm really having fun right now decoding a bunch of buildings in the Bay Area, and sort of getting back into that in a more consistent level. And basically what you're doing is I'm looking at a building. There was that one picture in the show, in the slides, of UC Berkeley Kerr campus, the old blind and deaf school. And I think it was designed by one person and built all at one time. So the whole campus is coherent, and it's one of the most peaceful campuses I've ever been to, except maybe University of Virginia, which was designed by one person, Thomas Jefferson, and built all at one time. Right? So all the parts fit together as a harmonious whole. The reason is that they're coming out of a single impulse, or a single person creating it, or the goal of having it be a reflection of the singularity, the oneness. Okay, so what creates, from a sacred geometry perspective, and the missing, I should not leave this out, the root harmonies, the musical harmonies, all that stuff comes out of division of the one, of the circle or the sphere, or the column of air, or the string, right? So you're taking a unit, a single something, a singularity, and you are dividing it by numbers 2, 3, and 5, and you're getting all these different relationships out of it. And so we're always going back to the source, the singularity. And geometry tells us that the source is a singularity, it's a oneness. And so the word I would add to your statement, that what matters is peace at all levels. It's you get most creative in it, et cetera, et cetera. And it comes from having a stable vibrating frequency. I would add the word coherent, because that's what happens when everything relates back to a single source. So the rose windows in the Gothic cathedrals, I had an image up there, thankfully, in this show that had the circle divided into 12 parts, and then a 12-pointed star thing weaving through all of that, and it gave you all the points for the little circles and the big circle at the center, and everything. Nothing is an accident. It's all coherently related. Everything's related to everybody else in harmony, and by the root harmonies, just not random relationships. It's the relationships that makes matter, that holds matter together. And so those relationships, it used to be taboo to design anything without using those relationships, because you would be out of tune with the universe. So that's all about coherence.
I think of coherence as peace, really, because that's the feeling you get from it, right?
I would say it the other way around. Coherence,
okay.
Peace. And so let me go a little further with that, because
Wait, hold on a sec. What does coherence mean then?
Coherence means you have everything is related to everything else, and the way that that's done in art and architecture which is where I've learned it, is that you have a single source, the circle, and you divide it by, into one of these harmonic interval structures, grids, and then so everything that's there is related back. It's generated from a single source, and its relationship is based on being related to a single source. And on the philosophical level or the spiritual level, what that means is that we are healing the state of estrangement or feeling that we are separate from the source, and whatever you call the source, whether you call it God or goddess or divinity or singularity or, blah, blah, blah. There is something that we all came from, and we're not separate from it. And when you heal that sense of separation and become one with everything, that's the ultimate path to peace.
Nice, nice. So
that's what I love about sacred geometry. If I didn't know this, I wouldn't have gone through those steps. But I'm going through it every time that I'm looking at a building and thinking, okay, which grid are they using? Or actually, the first question is there any harmony between the parts? Is there something holding this whole thing together in a stable, peaceful, coherent set of relationships in the, in the length and width and height of the building? And are the windows and doors related to that? Are they an expression of the same harmonic that's being used? Right? I mean, it's the same thing in music. We have rules about you're playing in this key, so all the frequencies and intervals are this set because they sound good together that way. That's what we do in art and what we used to do in art and architecture when we followed sacred geometry.
I had a friend of mine from Europe who said, how could you live in a country where a lot of the cities, most or all the cities, are not built based on sacred geometry? What? Okay.
Yeah. Well, we've lost. I didn't say this in the talk, but this fact that we're not teaching geometry, that it's not you have to get into our school system, it's reading, writing, and arithmetic. In the ancient world, it was geometry. That was the entrance exam. And with that whole as the basis of education, people living in America don't know that they're living. I mean, they know they're living in chaotic environments. They complain all the time about the buildings and the homes and stuff, but they're clueless about why. And so we're in a state that I call double amnesia. We have forgotten about that this is the basis of everything.
Nice. Okay.
And most double amnesias are not healable. But with geometry, all you have to do is look at flowers, look at nature, relations to everything, look at the golden ratio in your hand and there's a golden ratio. Whoops. Oh, I got the blurry background thing on. Can't anyway, there you go. There we go. There's a golden spiral right there, just because the length is all, 1, 1, 2, 3, etc. 5, 8, or that to the whole arm, that's 1, and that's 1.618, and et cetera, et cetera. You can rediscover it even if all the books were burned.
Right. Okay, so what about chaos? That wily thing that creates all the beautiful variations of geometry in the universe and makes every one of us different, every blade of grass different, every tree different, and messes it up in the most perfect way ever.
Well, there we have a little bit of a conundrum, because the ancient world didn't think of chaos the same way. So that's coming out of a dualistic worldview, and they had a holistic worldview. And so, Pythagoras said geometry is a study of order in space. And when I started teaching that to people, I realized that they were using the dualistic definitions of the word order, that it is something opposed to chaos. Whereas in the ancient world, they didn't have a concept of chaos because they saw the whole material world and the universe and everything as a unified, coherent, orderly, inherently orderly world. And so there's a lot of variety. And instead of talking about dualism, they talked about polarity. And the beauty of that is the polarity is part of the one. It's not separate from, because it's like two sides of a coin. So the magnet is my favorite example. You've got a North Pole and a South Pole. They attract each other. If you take two bar magnets, the north and south go bam. But if you try to bring the two norths together, there's that invisible force field there, the magnetic field, that you can't push them together. Well, they're not, the positive and negative, not two separate things. They're the poles of a single something. And that is a fundamentally different worldview that sacred geometry in the ancient world gives us. Everything comes out of the circle or the sphere. You divide it by 2, 3, and 5, and you create everything that matters.
Wow. So, what it makes me think of is, if we think of it that way, all of our problems are perfect. Because those are the chaos, right? It's all perfect as part of, well, you can see it as growth, or it's perfect in the system.
Yes, it is. It is in the ancient world, it would be seen as an expression of the creativity of the one.
Nice.
And that's what in the I'm working on putting my many decades of interest in the Genesis creation story, interpreting it through geometry, and I don't know how many sessions are going to be in this class, but it's going to be a lot to cover everything. And the beauty of that, telling that story with the geometry, with the mandala, the flower creation, is that you get that first circle, it divides into a second circle, and right there, right off the bat, the one becomes two, or singularity becomes polarity, and then automatically threeness, or the trinity, or the triad, is created. It's not a separate step. And that's a little clue that all you had to do was come out of a state of oneness into a state of plurality, of diversity, and for everything to be created. And so there is, that holistic worldview doesn't go around judging things as orderly, examples of order and chaos. It goes saying, oh, that is another manifestation of the oneness.
So, I'm looking at mapping out the musical interval relationships of every one of the 70 trillion cells with an electron microscope. And every single part of the body, and mapping out the musical interval relationships. And I've talked to people, and we're thinking that it's going to be octaves, a musical fifth, and a musical third, mostly, or unison, which is the exact same, because those are the main intervals that come up in the harmonic series. And I assume that all the geometries would be totally harmonious in a healthy person, or in the template of perfection for that human. So, because I'm thinking, once we find that template of perfection of musical interval relationships, because it's different from person to person as far as the frequencies, but the relationships are going to be the same.
Right.
So we find that template of relationship perfection, we can resonate people into perfect health and get rid of all disease in the world. That's all.
Wait a minute. I hear a message coming from Pythagoras.
Yeah.
He said that, oh God. Oh, come in again.
Yeah.
You can learn everything you need to know by observing nature. That was one of them. But what was the one? Oh,
complete harmony.
Oh, darn it. say what you said before. Trigger it
So
again.
complete harmony. We find the musical interval relationships for the template of perfection in the body.
He said proportion is divine and measurement is mundane.
I love it. I love it. So interesting.
The relationship part, okay?
So
relationship of the intervals is divine because it comes out of the singularity dividing itself into 2, 3, and 5.
wow, that's really cool because, you know, often people go, what's the frequency of a circle? Well, it's totally, there's no frequency. You have to assign it. You have to assign an edge or something, a frequency. And then from there, you can look at the relationship to that. But you have to start with some assignment because it's technically not a frequency. It's technically a circle, right? Or if you've got a square, you know, it's like, what is the frequency of the square? Well, you have to, or triangle, I should say, isosceles triangle. Well, you have to assign one side to a frequency before you can find the other relationship to that frequency, that first frequency. It's an assignment. It's not is. Oh, I can't wait to hear what you're going to say now.
Yeah. It's this is what's so gorgeous. I mean, we're really digging into why we need to go back to sacred geometry because it's every time we're coming back around to a different worldview. So the ancient world's worldview answer to that is that the circle, and I'm not making this I'm making this up. I'm just, you know, things I've learned from my teachers are just popping up as you talk. We say that the circle is the source, the circle or the sphere, whether we're talking visualizing it 2 or 3 dimensionally, but they're very clear that the circle is the source of everything, and that's why in the Genesis creation story and in other stories, you start with a circle and then you subdivide it into the second one that's on it, that has its center on the circumference. And but that first one is conceptualized or regarded as the source of everything. So I would change what you said to not that the circle doesn't have a frequency, it has the potential for all frequencies, and you get to choose which one to pull out of it. That's the perspective of the ancient world.
I love it.
And that's why, you know, I don't want to get too far into that Genesis story because without showing the images, people won't be able to follow it. But it's basically saying that the beginning, the first chapter of Genesis is not the material world at all. It's all happening in the mind of the one, in the mind of the source, the creator. And so everything that's happening there are principles. It's the law of physics, the laws of nature being thought up and established as principles first, because you can't. And I did say this in the talk, so this will go back to that. I think I said in there that you can't have an apple fall out of a tree if the principle of gravity the law of gravity hasn't been created yet. Okay. And that's what sacred geometry is. It's working at that. It works at that level of figuring out those laws, those relationships between everything, you know, how everything works. And all of that has to be set up first for the apple to fall, for us to hear sound, to see light, to, you know, all that stuff. So it wasn't light being created. It was the idea of light being created on what the Hindus call the causal realm before creation. So this is what the creator has to do before the creator creates the creation. He has to create foundation for it. And that's what the word firmament means. It doesn't mean firm dirt or something. In Hebrew, it means firm ideas, principles.
You know, it's like I end up here, and maybe it's a good place to end, is it commonly happens when I am listening to sacred geometry talks. It's like, I feel like I've finally connected to the mind of God in how God creates the universe.
Mhm.
He's using geometry as the building blocks, or she, or oneness, or whatever. It's
Actually, the Hebrew word, it's there if you're careful. So many people miss this. It's right there in, I don't know, maybe the second sentence or something of Genesis. The pronoun is they. It's right there. It's the one and the all. It's and I said this in the talk. The Elohim is the word that we mistranslated as God, and it's the plural of the word for a singularity, a oneness. How can you have the plural of a singularity? Well, that's the way that's the paradigm, that's the worldview. There is a oneness, a singularity, which has within its mind or consciousness or something, it has the ability of all potential.
Cool.
Right.
You want to end with the Om? Tell us about the Om and end with it.
Okay. So this is one of my favorite ways to come into peace and to apply the law of three out of sacred geometry. Plato said nothing exists till three. And there are a gazillion ways to understand that and apply it and stuff. But so that's another story. We'll just apply the story here. But it basically, I'll just leave it at that. They have an understanding that 1, 2, 3, jump. Takes 3 steps for anything to manifest. So when I studied yoga in my 20s, both traditions that Yogananda's and Satchidananda's Integral Yoga Institute, they were teaching Om. They didn't chant the way a lot of us in the West do. It was a 3-syllable thing. And the AUM is the way it's spelled, and each of those is a separate syllable. So it's A-O-M, 3 distinct syllables. So there's how much time do you want to spend on this?
Oh, we're really almost out of time.
Okay, so I'll just, there's a lot you could say about how to really get it. But what I love about the 3-syllable is that every time I share it with people, they say, oh my goodness, that is so much more effective. And effective at what? What the Om is supposed to do is bring you into that state of being centered and focused and calm. Peaceful, right? Back to tying it into what we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. And so the ah sound is sort of, most people, I asked the students in the class, where do you experience this sound? And the ah is out here. I call it a mask of sound. It's out sort of in front of you. And then and you make that by basically sighing. Ah, right? But you make you drop your jaw as relaxed as you can and make it open as much as possible. So the difference between a really different sound, much more effective. And then the next sound, the O, you get your lips into a circle and sort of a sphere in shape. The inside of your mouth is a sphere, and that makes a really different sound. So the difference between oh, really wonderful. And that sound sort of comes inside, and you feel it vibrating in the front of in sort of inside the skin and inside, and nasal cavities and sinus, all that stuff. And some people get it down in here. And then the third sound is really different. At the we usually, that was nice chocolate. We bring our lips together. And to do this sound, you don't bring the lips together. You bring them close enough that they're tickling each other, just from the vibration. Okay. So, and I'm licking my lips because that helps you make the sound and feel the tickle. And that little resonance you're hearing there is the beginning of overtoning. So a lot of people naturally start to make overtonings, even if they've never even heard of overtones in that. And that sound comes really down deep inside, and people feel it in their chest and stuff. So there's a sound coming from out here to in the skull to down inside. That's what everybody says the Om is supposed to do. But you have to use the 3 syllables Om for that to happen, because the sounds are moving in and bringing your attention inward, following where the sound is vibrating. So I love it. I love passing.
So you want to do it together?
So that's another, what would I do with $1 million?
Oh.
Teach everybody the 3 syllable Om. Life.
Cool. Let's do it together. You have original sound ready to go there? Can you turn it on?
Let's see. I have it off.
Turn it on.
Turn it on.
Click on the words.
Uh,
Original sound off and click
okay.
on it. And, okay, cool. Let's do it together and we'll end that way. You start.
Yeah, and we'll divide it up in equal thirds of time.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Likewise. Lots of fun.